Well, in a later exchange, Senator Warner asked for clarity on whether Tulsi Gabbard, the US Director of National Intelligence, was a member of the Signal group chat, which had discussed the bombing of the Houthis in Yemen.
This was not only sloppy, it not only violated all procedures, but if this information had gotten out, American lives could have been lost. The Houthis had this information, could reposition their defensive systems. So I want to get a little more information about this. Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address? So you're not, are you denying? Ma'am, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because
Council.
it's all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
stated, is it classified or non-classified information on this text?
I can confirm.
Well, that was Mark Warner, Virginia Senator, Democratic Virginia Senator, and he's repeated those calls in the last few minutes for them to release the in full text of this exchange. Let's return to Professor Michael Clarke, who's with me in the studio. I mean, it was excruciating, really, watching this. And she certainly didn't seem comfortable either confirming that she was on the talk or indeed confirming whether or not it was classified.
No, and I think the administration are going to have a hard time holding that line. They say that there was no classified material involved and it didn't do any harm in the event. Well, it's very hard to imagine there wasn't classified material involved because Jeff Goldberg, the journalist, said there was targeting packages, there was timing, there were sequences, and there were names of CIA operatives. Now, if that's not classified material, I don't know what is. So if the US administration is going to say that, no, this is not a problem because there was no classified material, I just don't think they can stick to that. And John Radcliffe, the director of the CIA, tried to get around it and said, well, we are allowed to use Signal. And that was been going on before I directed the CIA. And he sort of implied that, well, you can use Signal for just purely functional things. Are you going, I'll see you at this meeting, or we'll go to this or go to that. But it certainly shouldn't be used, is his implication, for anything substantive. But it clearly was being used for something substantive. And while Tulsi Gabbard was giving her opening statement, I was watching John Radcliffe. I've never seen anybody look so uncomfortable. I watched him for 3 or 4 minutes, and he shifted in his chair, and he shuffled his papers, and he sort of played around. And I thought, this is a man who really isn't comfortable about what's going to happen next. And he did a better job than Tulsi Gabbard in answering, but both of them were floundering because what they said just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Certainly to Mark Warner, who was very aggressive in the way he was asking questions, but he was very straightforward. Were you on the group chat or not? And she wouldn't answer. If it's not classified as you claim, then why can't we all see it? What's the problem? It's either classified and we can't see it, in which case it shouldn't have been on there, or it's not classified, in which case we can see it. And again, they didn't have an answer to that. So it was, as you say, excruciating in its own way and very uncomfortable for them.
John Radcliffe, he wanted to make it very clear that Signal was loaded onto his devices by the CIA. He said it was permissible for work use as long as any decisions made are followed through external channels. It was entirely permissible and lawful, and again, it didn't include classified info.
Yes, exactly. So there's nothing wrong with using Signal, but to be honest, I mean, they'd be better if they just didn't. That's the whole point, is that if principals, as they say, senior people in any administration, whether it's in America or anywhere else, if the principals are discussing something, then they should do it in a formal, secure way, in a secure environment, and somebody should be there, and officials should be there making some notes. Recording what was said, recording what the outcomes were, so there's no ambiguity about it. I mean, this just leaves it wide open to ambiguity as to how serious all this was and what was said. And the United States here is very lucky on 2 counts. Very lucky that this didn't have a disastrous outcome, which caused the loss of American lives. And very lucky that it was Jeff Goldberg who intercepted or was included on the chat of the Atlanticist magazine. And although, I mean, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump have been insulting to him and rude to him, that's the way they are, the fact is he's a very responsible journalist. And he was very careful to take out of the material anything that could have had a genuine national security element. But I mean, I think, as James was saying from Washington, if they're accusing him of lying, then he may go all in on this and say, look, you know, I'm not going to reveal the material, but here's the sort of thing that they said. So he has the power at the moment, given what he says he knows, to really embarrass them in this. And I think the White House will find it difficult to just brush this one under the carpet or move on. That'll be the reaction is always, oh, move on, move on. The public isn't interested in all this. I think they'll find the public is quite interested in this for quite some time.
And Mark Warner also took the opportunity of having the FBI director, Kash Patel, in front of him to ask whether the FBI had been asked to investigate it. He said, I don't have an update. He looked slightly terrified as well, didn't he?
Yes.
But Mark Warner came back really quickly and said, I've asked for one by the end of the day. So we're going to have to get something, aren't we, from the FBI by the end of the day, America time, as to whether there is an investigation.
Whether they're going to look at it or not. And as we were saying earlier on, the FBI and the CIA famously don't get on terribly well. I mean, they really do compete with each other, both for resources, for the ear of the president, and there's a lot of friction between them. I mean, historically, there always has been. And Kash Patel will have to come back with an answer. If we're not going to look at it, why not? Is it so trivial that you're not going to? That won't hold up. If you are going to look at it, what are you going to look at? And again, the senior figures here, you know, the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State for Defence, the Secretary of State, the Foreign Minister, all involved. I mean, all there. And Tulsi Gabbard as well, Director of National Security. So big figures, big names are all involved in this. If the FBI is not going to look at it, it'll be very difficult for them to hold that line, because somebody is going to have to look at it. And I don't think the Democrats... This is the first issue the Democrats, since Trump's inauguration, this is the first issue they can really get a grip on. They've been pretty poor until now in offering any opposition, because they've been, frankly, you know, bowled over by the speed with which Trump is doing everything. That's been the strategy. Flood the zone, as Steve Bannon says. Make so many announcements and be so outrageous that everyone is on the back foot trying to cope with the implications of what's being done. They literally, and some in the Democratic Party said, look, we've got to play dead. We can't respond to this. We'll just play dead and see how they get on in the first year. Not a good idea. This is the first issue in which they can take a stand in a fairly concrete way and try to get on the front foot for once against the Trump administration. First time it's happened.
Michael, thanks very much, Michael Clarke.